and Investment Committee. It is a great honor to welcome us to the very first in our NBCC investment series. This afternoon, we have with us Mr. Alex Oko. He is the Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. Please let us observe the national anthems of Nigeria and Britain. Welcome back. We apologize for that technical itch. Once again, we have with us Mr. Alex Oko, the Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. Mr. Oko will be looking at investment and concession opportunities in Nigeria. Let me run you through our webinar guidelines. Please, if the Zoom volume is too low, check your system volume. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. To comment and have discussions, use the chat icon. Please note that only questions submitted via the Q&A icon will be entertained. Once again, I welcome you to the first in the NBCC investment series. It is my honor to introduce and welcome Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi, our President and Chairman of Council of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce. Madam President, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Shituki. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, past presidents, patrons, council members, members of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first edition of the NBCC Investment Series, themed this public-private partnerships, investment and concession opportunities in Nigeria, organized by the Trade and Investment Committee of the Chamber. Do allow me to introduce the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce to those of you who may not know us. It was established in 1977 to promote trade and investment between Nigeria and Britain. The NBCC is affiliated with the British Chambers of Commerce, which gives members beneficial access to a network of 53 chambers across the UK and 71 other international affiliates. Membership of the NBCC is currently about 400 top corporates from all sectors of the economy. May I invite those of you who are not already members to join the NBCC by commencing the process and visiting our website. Now to the business of today. The NBCC Investment Series is designed to provide our members direct access to potential business opportunities. We intend to feature business and investment opportunities with state governments, government parastatals, agencies, and other institutions. Today, our focus is on the Bureau of Public Enterprises, the BPE, and we intend to discuss opportunities and concession projects available for uptake, investment incentives, the economic benefits and social value of privatization and of non-performing public enterprises, and the legal framework that protects investors in public-private partnerships and concession deals in Nigeria. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest speaker for today's session, Mr. Alexandra Ayola. He was reappointed for the second term as DG of the Bureau for Public Enterprises on April 10, 2021. The BPE is a government agency with the responsibility to transform, to reform, and privatize state-owned enterprises. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Oko was managing partner of Ashford and Megai Consulting, a leading wholly indigenous management consulting firm. He has over 32 years experience, 22 of which were in banking. In his first tenure as BPE helmsman, he embarked on a comprehensive change program of rediscovery and repositioning that has put the Bureau on a path of disciplined and responsible reform and privatization, as well as an effective post-privatization management regime. Through his visionary and dedicated leadership, the federal government of Nigeria has entrusted the Bureau with a significant mandate to drive the PPP program in Nigeria. Mr. Oko, in his second tenure, is committed to creating the new bold future for the Bureau by positioning it in a strategic role to take the lead in impacting Nigeria's economic well-being through bold and transformative reform initiatives. Mr. Oko studies sociology at the University of Benin and holds a master's degree in banking and finance from the University of Ibadan. He is also an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. Ms. Lara Kayode is the founder of the law firm O. Kayode & Co., an IP boutique firm. Her practice covers both corporate and commercial matters, with particular emphasis on industrial and intellectual property, advertising law, and ADR, with a special interest in mediation. She is an active practitioner in the field of IP and an international speaker. Lara is currently ranked by Chambers of Partners and is a WCR Global Leader. In 2019, she received the prestigious INTA President's Award. At the NBCC, Lara is a Vice Chairperson of the Trade and Investment Committee. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and I now have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Oko to make his presentation. Thank you very much and enjoy the session. Mr. Oko.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for the very kind introduction. The President and Chairman of Council, Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, please excuse me, and the very distinguished members of the Chamber of Commerce and those who have been kind enough to to join us today. I'm quite delighted to be invited to share a few thoughts with us on public-private partnerships. I understand that the perspective that the Chamber will be interested in this afternoon is basically a view around the investment and concession opportunities in Nigeria. So if I may just be allowed to share my screen, I'd like to guide this discussion, through some of the, slides that I have prepared for this presentation. I hope you can all see the slides. Thank you very much. Now, just a bit of an outline of how I intend to run through this very brief, presentation. I understand I have about 20 minutes to do this. So I'll sort of speak to the background and share some thoughts around, what we do as an agency of government, and with specific emphasis on public-private partnerships. And also like to share some incentives that the federal government has sort of put together to encourage private participation in the provision of infrastructure through PPP. So by way of a background, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like for us to understand that, Nigeria has a huge shortfall in terms of the infrastructure stock, in the country. And when you talk about infrastructure, it has, significant connotations with the way that, the efficiency the efficiency of production in any economy is delivered. And so when we talk about, the competitiveness nature, of our production process, in an economy, it's also a function of the infrastructure stock. When you're talking about power, roads, rail, and all of that, base that provides, for production to be more competitive in an economy. So that's what we refer to as the infrastructure stock, of an economy. Currently, it is, rated to be about 35% of our GDP, and that falls far short, of, the benchmark of similar emerging economies, which range, in the region of about 70% of the GDP. So to put that in perspective, South Africa, which is the second largest economy in Africa, has an infrastructure stock to GDP ratio of about 73%. And that's supposed to be the second largest economy, while the first largest or the largest economy in the continent or on the continent is at around 35%. So that tells us, that there is a huge gap in terms of the infrastructure stock in the country, in our economy. And according to the new infrastructure master plan, for us to bridge that gap, the country or the economy will require about $2.3 trillion over the next 23 years in order to be able to, to bridge that gap. And we see how so daunting, this task is. Now, given the amount of resources, that, we will need as an economy to bridge this gap, it then becomes more apparent that trying to provide, for this shortfall through fiscal and budgetary means alone is simply not feasible. So that presents, significant opportunity for private sector, participants and investors to then, through a robust and creative PPP program, participate, in the provision of key infrastructure to drive the economy of this size. Now, as a result of this realization, the government approved a policy, which is called the NP4, essentially to provide this, robust PPP framework, and in furtherance of that, that objective of government, sometime last year, I believe on the 14th of September, the government then issued a pronouncement, a policy pronouncement, which sort of brings, better clarity, to the way that the governance of PPP in this economy is managed. And I will speak to that in greater details later. Now, when we talk about public-private partnerships, what exactly are we talking about? As different from a direct procurement, a budgetary procurement of that particular infrastructure or asset by the government. Now, it's basically a long-term contract, between a government agency, whether at a national or a sub-national level, a public party and a private party, for the development and or management of a public asset or service or infrastructure. And the interesting thing about this particular arrangement is that, it provides, a basis where, the private agent bears significant risk and, also the management responsibility throughout the lifespan of that asset, infrastructure, or service. And the remuneration, the returns on that investment is linked significantly to the performance of the asset. So a PPP, brings or co-joins, a private sector investor and a public entity, in a mutually assured prosperity type of situation, knowing fully well, because the risks are also well shared, that a mutually assured destruction scenario does not occur. So they have a joint interest, in the success of that particular asset, service, or infrastructure. And for us as a government, we see a lot of benefits, in this particular arrangement, because it reduces, the tendency of government to borrow to fund the provision of this infrastructure on balance sheet, that is, through budgetary appropriation. And so that's one of the key advantages of a PPP arrangement. So rather than government directly spending, from its budgetary allocation to build roads, airports, power stations, key infrastructure, when you have a PPP arrangement, it reduces that burden on the government. It also, PPP enables parties, both the public sector and the private sector parties, to be allocated the risk that they are best able to manage. So there's adequate risk sharing in a way that then provides value for money for the provision of that service or infrastructure. And we also believe that, it encourages private sector participation, in the government in a manner that it then introduces, the innovation that, is reputed to be resident in the private sector, and also the efficiency as against the bureaucracy, of government trying to own and manage this sort of assets and infrastructure. We also believe that, in addition to the efficiency that it introduces into the system, there's also this issue around transparency, around, how, government engages in its procurement. Now, a PPP, arrangement actually puts the burden of the procurement and provision of that asset, that infrastructure, on the private sector party. So the issue of accountability and transparency are sort of, addressed. I've spoken to this slide, so there may be no need to further, expatiate on this. Now, last year, recall that I mentioned that, government through a pronouncement in September last year, brought about, better clarity in terms of the framework and the process and all the parties' roles and responsibilities in the delivery of PPP in Nigeria. And for us, it was a huge boost because what private sector investors and private capital indeed abhors the most, is lack of clarity. And private sector capital is not sentimental. It would always flow in the direction where it sees clarity about how it will be adequately returned and compensated. So we are quite happy that, in September last year, the federal government actually issued this circular. And the circular clearly states that the Bureau of Public Enterprises will act, on behalf of the federal government as the counterparty on all infrastructure projects being developed on a PPP basis. So that sort of clarifies, the role of who the counterparty for the federal government is, who the private sector should be engaging, on these PPP type contracts. So, and it also clarifies the role of the regulator, ICRC, which says that, it will continue to play, as the agency of government, the regulatory role, with respect to PPP transactions, having the powers to inspect, supervise, and monitor, the projects and the processes of concessioning and public-private partnerships. So that clarifies the role. Let me speak a bit more about this because essentially you want to know the stages that the PPP goes through as a private sector investor, trying to engage government in PPP. So the MDAs or the ministries, departments, and agencies own the assets typically. Now, the assets, if it's a greenfield PPP, the interest is indicated, to the ministry and BPE. BPE then manages the process of, evaluating the project, project development, the establishing the bankability of the project, and then moves it on to the budget arm of the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. In order for us to be able to align this specific project with national priorities, whether it's talking about the economic growth and recovery program or plan, such that we don't have a confusion, and duplication in the provision of this asset. So the clearinghouse is the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And then it comes back to BPE for, the transaction implementation. And once the transaction is concluded, it goes to ICRC for monitoring and regulatory issues. I'll skip this slide. Now, just talking about our track record, just so that you know what we've done over the years, the Bureau of Public Enterprises, was established about 32 years ago. In its previous life, it was known as the Technical Committee on Privatization and Commercialization. However, by an act of Parliament in 1999, the Bureau of Public Enterprises was established. And over this period, we have sort of reformed, various state-owned assets and enterprises in the region of about 234. And this reform has come by way of strategies, different strategies, privatization, commercialization, sector liberalization, like we saw in the case of the telecoms, reform, and activities have cut across various sectors of the economy, from agriculture, banking and finance. You will recall that the initial wave of the privatization of the first generation banks, in which the federal government owned significant stake. I'm talking about First Bank, UBA, Union Bank. The privatization of these banks were handled by the Bureau of Public Enterprises. The cement companies also, Benue Cement, now Dangote Cement, hotels and tourism, Transcorp, Hilton, and so on. And in power, of course, the most recent, reform that we've done has been in the power sector, with the unbundling of the entire value chain from generation, transmission, and distribution. So we have a decent footprint in economic reforms and the optimization, let me put that with the optimization of federal-owned assets over this period of 32 years. Of course, in the process, from the sale of the assets, we generate proceeds, in excess of 1 trillion naira for the budget, but that is not the primary goal of reform. Is to improve the efficiency of these assets, which were, previously managed, by government. We know that government is not the best manager, of businesses and assets. So the objective has been over the years to sort of transit both the ownership and the management of these assets to the private sector. Of course, in addition to privatization, we've also done some sector reform work, projects like I mentioned, telecoms, of course, in 2000, the telecoms reform was handled by BPE. Debt management office, basically, in terms of being able to understand what our total, obligation as a sovereign entity, both at the national and subnationals, are. We then sort of created the debt management office. Pensions, reform was done by BPE. We don't like to say this often, but as part of the transparency initiatives, in 2000, around 2000, the EFCC was also created by the PPP. So don't hold us for that anyway. So going to the opportunities of PPP in Nigeria specifically. So at the beginning of each fiscal year, we sort of design a work plan. And in that work plan, all the federally owned assets that we intend to privatize, either by a core investor sale approach, or which other, whatever sale methodology you may find appropriate, or concessioning or liberalization, or PPP type transactions. So all of those transactions are sort of defined or articulated in a work plan for the year. The work plan is approved by the council. It's called the National Council on Privatization. And then we begin to engage, in terms of the implementation of those projects in the work plan. Now, so for the year, with regards to public-private partnership and concessioning opportunities for the year, we have, the concessioning currently going on of Zungeru power plant. Zungeru is megawatt, hydro plant. Is situated on the lower streams of the Kaduna River. And like I said, it has a capacity to generate about 700 megawatts. Now, when we talk about concessioning, it's important I explain, that in a concession process, it's only the economic rights of the asset that are transferred to the private sector investor or prospective investor. The legal ownership of the asset still remains with the federal government. So it's only the economic rights that are transferred. As and that is different from privatization, where both the ownership, the legal ownership of the asset and the economic rights, obviously, are sort of sold or completely transferred to the private sector. So most of the dams in Nigeria, Kainji, Shiroro, Jeba, and now Zungeru are not privatized. They are concessioned for a period of time. So currently, we're in the process of concessioning through PPP the Zungeru Power Dam, and we also have about 12 what we call medium-sized, small to medium-sized hydropower plants. 4 of them are brownfield assets, already existing assets, while 8 of them are expressions in the greenfield space, expressions to build these hydro plants that we have received, from private sector, investors intending to make these assets or infrastructure available on a PPP basis. We're also in the process, as embedded in the work plan for 2021, in the process of concessioning the Calabar and Kano free trade zone areas, or what you call the special economic zones. So that's one of the opportunities also. Also, in terms of concession and PPP, we are also in the process of concessioning the Tafawa Balewa Square in Lagos. We had to revoke the previous concession in 2018 because there were failures and gaps, in the management of that particular concession. So this time around, we've actually developed a model, that seeks to convert this iconic facility, into a multi-purpose trade convention center, and it will include hospitalities, hotels, trade fair, complex, trade exhibition complex, multi-purpose, mall, and just all kinds of facilities. We have a brilliant design that's been created for the concession of TBS. Same applies to Lagos International Trade Fair Complex. So that's also up for concessioning, according to our work plan for the year. We're looking at concessioning also the construction of liquefied petroleum, gas plants and ethanol plants in Delta State. I'm happy to share the specific details and location of this. As part of, and this is a very interesting concept, as part of unlocking liquidity, from government suboptimally deployed assets, because for us, we believe that we don't have a balance sheet problem in Nigeria. Nigeria as a sovereign nation owns assets all over the country. So the challenge really is how to extract liquidity, from these assets, and how to make the assets contribute, more revenues and liquidity to the process of funding our fiscal plans. So we've come up with this very interesting concept, which is basically to relocate, government correctional facilities, from the prime, locations where they occupy now, to more remote areas. And we then, sort of redevelop, their current location for more, more commercial, purposes and remuneration. So if you look at this very interesting picture here, it says Nigerian Correctional Service, Ikoyi Custodial Center, Ikoyi, Lagos. So the question you want to ask yourself, and without any, insult meant, is what are prisoners doing living in Ikoyi? That's a very prime area. And the whole idea is to be able to relocate this particular facility to the outskirts of Lagos while we redevelop, that particular facility, just to generate and optimize the asset. In real estate, they say it's all about location, location, location. There may be more interesting and challenging, locations with regards to this strategy. So when you talk about military formations and facilities, Bonny Camp, what do we have to be there? Ikeja, do we have to be there? So we're looking at very creative strategies to sort of optimize government assets and extract liquidity to fund our fiscal plans. Right. Also, with regards to concessioning opportunities, there is, of course, a process going on right now, basically to concession the Abuja Stadium, which is the MKO Abiola Stadium, and the National Stadium in Lagos, and all the adjoining areas. You see, we can be more creative about how we, we make better use of these facilities, in addition to their original intended purpose. So if you go to a stadium like, Bernabeu, no, not Bernabeu, what's this Real Madrid stadium called? I forget in Madrid. You see, the stadium itself, of course, houses sporting facilities and all of that. But around the stadium, all kinds of commercial, activities, shopping malls, and all of that are wrapped around the main bowl itself. And there are, residential stadium. So there's a point of attraction that brings traffic into the facility. And then there are, businesses that are established to then mine or take advantage, of that, captive traffic. So that's what we're also looking at in terms of the concession opportunities, with the stadia. Of course, there's also the ongoing concession of the 4 international airports being handled by the Federal Ministry of Aviation, and these are Abuja, Lagos, Kano, and Port Harcourt airports. The Federal Ministry of Works and Housing is also looking at the possibility of, through the HDMI, basically to look at reconcessioning, the Lagos International Trade Fair. And of course, apart from those, assets or services or infrastructure that we as a government, are proactively putting on the PPP space or the PPP market, we also have, of course, entertain, unsolicited proposals for assets infrastructure that originate, from the investment, plate of a private sector investor, and we'll analyze them and, of course, see whether they fit with our strategic national, priorities. Of course, the whole world is talking about, how to decarbonize our climate, our world, and so we're also looking at, implementing, climate smart public-private partnership projects, and we are, being supported by the World Bank, basically in developing a framework for this type of, assets that, are environmental friendly. So what are the incentives, for PPP, projects or transactions, especially for the private sector investor? Basically, in terms of the import duty, when you're talking about power, 0% import duty on equipment and machinery for the power sector, clearly. Same thing for solid minerals, and of course, agriculture and agro-allied, projects. Same applies for the, iron and steel, basically to help, drive manufacturing as a base for growing the economy. And, the requirements, that are also, needed in order to be able to access these incentives, I've sort of summarized on this slide. But, you can also go to the website, Nigerian Investment Promotion, Commission, to sort of access, some of these incentives. So in conclusion, I'm hoping that we'll have more of these discussions coming out of the questions and issues that will be raised. We are, very optimistic, that, our continuing engagement with the private sector, will sort of unleash the capacity of the private sector, both in terms of capital and management and innovation in improving, the infrastructure stock, in the country, driving on a PPP framework. So I thank you for your kind attention, and God bless. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oko. That was indeed a whirlwind tour of, what you do. It was so insightful, so informative, and I know that the questions will come. Please post your questions in the Q&A as we proceed. We have him here. Let's ask all the questions we've been wanting to ask. It wasn't easy to get him to come and spend some time with us today. So let's please take advantage of this time. Before we go into the question and answers, I would like to invite our sponsor, ProShare. So I have the managing editor and chief economist, Mr. Teslim Shitabe, who will give us just a few words about his business. We thank you very much for being our sponsor. Mr. Shitabe, please could you switch on your video and proceed? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being on this platform. I'm really happy to see Mr. Oko in attendance. It's, as you had rightly pointed out, he's a very difficult fellow to tie down. He's very busy. But this is a brilliant presentation and a brilliant opportunity for me to talk about what ProShare does and what some of the things he said fits very neatly into the way ProShare thinks the future has to be engineered. There are 3 R's that we look at ProShare. We believe we need to reimagine Nigeria. We need to rethink Nigeria, and we need to re-strategize Nigeria. And I think those 3 R's are well covered by the presentation of Mr. Oko. And one of the things I would like to quickly point out here is that ProShare is basically a data and economic intelligence company, but we have decided to transmute gradually into a company that is basically an ideas factory. We intend to go into artificial intelligence, we intend to upgrade into machine learning, and we intend to improve our digital footprints in the area of money and capital markets. But one of the most important areas for us is to tweak Nigeria. And we can only tweak Nigeria with the public sector. I think all of us will agree on that. And so Mr. Oko's statements, opening and remarks sits so brilliantly with the future that ProShare sees for itself as well as the private sector. We talk about PPP, rethinking the paradigm. I think I would like to share my slide with you. And so we can just talk very briefly on a few things that we see. Right. I hope my slide is very visible.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So now we think that going forward, there's a need to shift our PPP models. PPP is the way to go. And now Mr. Oko said something that was very, very astonishing. Astonishing in the sense that I think he had a peep into our playbook for 2022, because he talked about looking at Nigeria from the perspective of balance sheet rather than income statement. Traditionally, what we've seen in Nigeria is for us to look at revenue and expenditure. Now, ProShare going forward is saying that we need a paradigm shift. We need to begin to look at Nigeria from the perspective of its balance sheet. Now, what does the balance sheet talk about? It talks about assets and liabilities. Nigeria is a country with great amount of assets that can generate a very strong series of cash flows. Now, what we have said is, given the COVID-19 situation, while most people see it as a downside for global economies, ProShare has chosen to see it as an upside for global economies, especially economies like Nigeria. Now, one of the reasons why we're saying that there are positives to gain from COVID-19 is the fact that there has become a situation of global liquidity glut. What do I mean by that? There is so much money outside looking for where to invest. And one of the best places to invest in is Nigeria. It provides great opportunities to people looking for superior returns. But the issue is, how do we unlock the assets that we have within Nigeria? And these are kind of ideas that ProShare going forward, it would like to partner with variety of private sector individuals and the public sector to unlock the assets inherent in Nigeria. I love Mr. Oko's presentation. It really touches right at the heart of the matter. Let us jointly and collectively unlock our potential. So rather than worry about revenues and worry about our costs, just worry about how do we develop assets and limit our liabilities. Yes, debt is a major problem for Nigeria, but it's not so much a debt problem. What, like some people have rightly pointed out, it's a revenue problem. And can we improve that revenue? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, again, we can. We can improve revenue. And that's part of ProShare's 2022 resolution, that we're going to see how we can partner with a variety of private sector and public sector entities to reinvent the Nigerian nation. The one-story narrative about Nigeria needs to go. Nigeria is more than a one-story narrative. Nigeria is a country of great opportunities and potentials if we can coalesce our resources, both in the private and public sector. I want to be very fast because I know I have about 2 minutes, but here on this slide, you'll see that we look at McKinsey, and McKinsey Consulting shows the old PPP paradigms and shows what is required in the new paradigms. In the old paradigms, we saw risk underpricing, weaker risk culture, backward-looking view, misalignment between risk and business strategy, unsound business steering decisions. The new strategy, the optimistic strategy that ProShare subscribes to, is that we will begin to see optimal risk pricing, which is what Mr. Oko referred to when he was looking at the ways some of these investments are going to be rejigged. Stronger risk culture. Yes, we need to, Nigeria does have elements of risk, but do we have a risk culture that can be managed? Yes, we do. And this is an area where we believe that the Bureau of Public Enterprises, ProShare, and a couple of other private sector entities and public entities can do very well in the coming year. We are going to be forward-looking. Like I said, we shouldn't work from our memory. What we should be working from is imagination. And that's what I saw in Mr. Oko's presentation, imagination. Great nations of the world are reimagining. Great countries, great companies of the world are reimagining. And so we're beginning to see a world of reimagination. Don't forget, we just heard about metaverse. So we're moving away from Facebook, we're going into metaverse. So that is the reimagination of the whole business process. It's the reimagination of the world, and it's also the reimagination of Nigeria as a country. So let's, ProShare's message basically is we need to start working from a position of imagination rather than the position of history. History is gone. Imagination can take us anywhere. And then on the final note here, we believe in integration of risk information into business decisions. So it's not just about us maybe concessioneering or privatizing or commercializing. It's also about building business processes that are sustainable. We've seen PPP projects that have been good on paper, but they've never really proven sustainable. Is this sustainability that I see Mr. Oko referring to in his presentation that really gets me excited? Next slide, please. This also continues, we can skip this slide, it also continues on my theme of the old PPP model and the need for a new PPP paradigm. Please move on. Now, ProShare has done about 15 years in the market with major footprints in the area of capital and money markets. But like I said earlier, we will do our capital and money market activities, but we do also intend to go into the area of making our pressure felt in the area of governance, and especially in the area of privatization, commercialization, and concessioneering. Here we have all the kind of things we will do, we currently do, and some that we will begin to do from next year. And here we also present a couple of reports that we have done that we feel your members will definitely find very useful in taking decisions in the coming year. Since it's only 2 minutes, I think I haven't done too bad a job of rushing through these slides, but I want to thank the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to deliver our pitch, and to thank Mr. Oko for attending this very important webinar. Thank you very much, MPC, and thank you very much, Mr. Oko.
Thank you, Mr. Shitabe. Indeed, you sped through, but I think we got your message. Could you please stop sharing? Thank you. Sharing your slides. Thank you so much. Now, I have quite a few questions, Mr. Oko. If I may please have you back on. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I mean, there are a lot of questions that we will go through. I believe in. We have 10 minutes, so it's going to be a real race round the track. But I really wanted to say thank you very much for your speech, for your presentation. As I said, it was enlightening, it was informative. It was scary at the beginning when you said really we were at the 35% level of our infrastructure stock. But by the time you ended, I'm actually, like the gentleman said, my imagination has gone totally, to the positive side. And I know that we can make it. We can do it. We will do it. Yes, we can, as he said. So the first question I have here is what pitfalls were identified in the past exercises and what plans are in place now to prevent them reoccurring?
Thank you. Like they say, hindsight is 2020, but there's a lot to learn from what we didn't do right, previously. So for the previous concessions in particular, I think that they were structured as developmental leases or developmental concessions of the brownfield assets. However, in the imagination and interpretation of the concessionaires, they treated them more like, lease or rental concessions. So they were more interested in maintaining the existing assets, and taking rent and rental income from the tenants, rather than looking at expanding the basis for making more revenue. If you do not develop the assets, then you sort of constrain your revenues, the existing, streams of revenues. So you go to Tafa Balewa Square, for example, all of those small cubicle shops are still there. They are still using the those kind of portable generators. So it's a glorified, how do I put it now? Jankara, for lack of a better word, rather than a more modern, facility. So we noticed that perhaps in evaluating the financial capacity of the concessionaire, we were not as thorough as we ought to have been. So we've learned all of those lessons, and that was also the case at Lagos International Trade Fair. So we're structuring these concessions, these current concessions, more from a developmental, perspective, not really from a rental perspective. And that's why we've taken it upon ourselves to create a design for the facility, right? So those designs will be the minimum, that concessionaire can aspire to own. And can, of course, improve on it, but not below. So those lessons have come in very useful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I have another one that's asking, interesting presentation, DG BPE. With the federal government's latest policy shift to give the BP authority to handle privatization, commercialization of assets, why is the FMWNH and the Aviation Ministry handling the concession of the 4 airports and the 12 highways? I think you were expecting this question, sir.
Yes, and I was hoping that it would come. But to be fair, the HDMI initiative started before the new clarity announcement, in September last year. And I must say that I engaged with the Minister of Works and Housing to bring the expertise that is resident in the Bureau of Public Enterprises, helping them to structure that particular process. At the end of the day, we're just looking for value for government. It really doesn't matter who does it. We just believe that because the skill is not resident in the ministry, so we should be the agency of government and then provide that transaction structuring skill for the government and for the ministries. But the benefit, at the end of the day, goes to the ministries. We don't collect any of it. concession fees and all of that. But we need to be able to structure the transactions properly. One, in order to ensure their bankability, and two, to be able to attract a wide spectrum of private capital in funding those infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. I have another one asking, are foreign private entities eligible to participate in the BPE's PPP projects, or is this restricted to local private entities?
Absolutely. Well, without sounding discriminatory, it will actually be a preference, because that gives you two advantages. One, you get the capital, and you also get it in the currency that you want. So that it becomes not just a PPP transaction; it also becomes an FDI. So it provides an opportunity for foreign direct investments and the inflow of the scarce currency that we're looking for. So we don't discriminate, but we encourage and structure the transaction in order to be able to attract the widest variety of prospective investors. And testing made a very, very important point. Should made a very, very important point that there's a lot of investment capital out there. With zero or negative, on capital out there, they're actually looking for credible markets, and transactions to invest this excess liquidity. So we need to be able to make ourselves attractive for that kind of capital to flow our way.
I think you're up for the challenge. I'm actually quite positive that you will indeed make Nigeria attractive enough for us to attract those investments. So another question says, are the benefits enjoyed by private parties from participation in PPP projects restricted to tax concessions?
Yes, there's a suite of incentives and and benefits apart from tax concessions. But like I said, it differs for each sector, and for you to have a more comprehensive information about what is applicable to your particular area of interest, I've provided that link from the website of NIPC, Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, and you can sort of click on it, and it will give you the suite of incentives available.
Excellent, sir. Excellent presentation by the DGBP. I wanted to ask if the privatization of the TCN was in the offing, and whether such privatization will help with solving the illiquidity in the power sector.
Tough question. Yes, in a sense, yes, it will. I believe it will. You recall that we privatized the generation end of the value chain. We also privatized the distribution end, which is the discos, through the creation of the discos. Now, the critical link between those two segments is transmission, right? And transmission, we attempted in 2013 through a management contract with Manitoba to sort of manage that key neck of the value chain. It didn't work out well, and so it resorted back to government for managing. But right now, it looks like you are preempting us. We're in the process of reforming the TCN, the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Because if you take, the fact 5 or 14 gigawatts of power at the generation end, and transmission can only wheel about 5 or 6 gigawatts or 6,000 megawatts of that power, you can begin to see the misalignment of the sector. So we need to fix transmission so that it can wheel that available power, all the way to the retail end, to the consumption end. Nigeria is doing about 5,000 megawatts on a daily basis now, just averaging about that. But we have 14. So you can imagine if that whole 14 flows, there will be massive improvement. We're not saying that is the total requirement of power generation for the country, but there will be massive improvement. If you're able to double or triple what is currently available. And the weak link is TCN. So we're looking at reforming TCN, first by unbundling it, and then secondly, by then, sort of either concessioning the transmission service provider itself, who deals with the the key infrastructure of transmission, the towers, the substations, and all of that. And we're hoping that before the end of next year, we should be able to finish the reform of this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. I've just been told that we have an additional 15 minutes to answer questions. So please keep your questions coming. Please remember to put them not in the chat box, but rather in the question and answer box so that we can address them. I have a question from Rashid Adegoke. He says, what is the timeline for the concessioning process for Calabar and Kano FTCs, as well as the TBS?
Okay. Hi, Rashid. Good to hear you. Yes, for Calabar and Kano. So we're handling the two together. We've engaged Messrs. Ernst and Young as a transaction advisor to that concessioning. The timeline for concluding is April 2022 for Calabar and Kano. TBS, our initial timeline was September this year. Of course, we've failed on that timeline, and that's because of some challenges that we're having with the state government, with the Lagos state government. We're hoping that we can resolve those issues very, very quickly, and then we'll move on to conclude on TBS. Lagos being the host government, we are looking at creating or ceding 25% of the winning SPV of the concessionaire to Lagos state government. So that helps us to manage issues around development approvals and the kind of stuff that castrated the federal secretariat. We don't want to go into that. So we've sort of looked for a political solution around that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Oladipo Dujirin says, my client has been trying to get approval for its lease between it and a parastatal for over 5 years, despite adequate agreements signed and consideration paid. How can the bureaucracy be tamed?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question? I didn't get the earlier part.
All right, so he says, my client has been trying to get approval for its lease between it and a parastatal for over 5 years, despite adequate agreements signed and consideration paid. How can the bureaucracy be tamed?
How can the bureaucracy be
tamed?
Tamed.
Yes.
Government is a government. And like they say, the wheels of government turns surely, but it turns slowly. I don't know what the issues are, what the challenges are, what this particular ministry, department, or agency is. But if you can, sort of email me what the details are, and then I can, follow up with the respective ministry, and I promise to get back to you.
Thank you very much, sir. This is from an anonymous attendee, and they say, thank you for the presentation. I suggest that the FG, the federal government, shouldn't just think of the relocation of all correctional centers, but should rather aim at harnessing economic values than the way they are. Urbanization can still meet up with wherever they're being relocated. As such, this may become useless.
Okay, good point. Like they said, life is lived forward but understood backward. So let's take advantage of what we have now. We can decide what to do if, in the middle of, the forest between Ekpe and Ijebu-Ode, development catches up with your relocation. But where we are now, we should take absolute, use. I mean, we should maximize that use. If you go to advanced countries, most of these correctional facilities, even police stations, are being redeveloped, from inner cities and high value commercial areas. Look at Falamo Police Barracks, for example. Look at Falamo Police Barracks. The question you ask yourself is, in terms of the aesthetics, and not just the value itself, but just how it complements that entire location, it's not really decent. So there's absolutely, I mean, from where we see, there's absolutely nothing wrong in that strategy. As long as you are very clear that you are not shortchanging the original use and intention of that facility. And what tends to happen is that once you relocate it, it becomes a point of attracting development around it in those alternative locations.
Exactly.
So we're quite happy that this is the way to go.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Anne Renus asking, thank you for the informative presentation, Mr. Oko. There have been a number of challenges, PPPs, including the power sector, National Theatre, to name a few. We'd be interested to understand how the Bureau guarantees and supports investors in managing PPP risks and sustainability.
See, another brilliant question. PPP, is like, Taslim also alluded to, is about being able to share the risk, between the two parties, public and private, allocating the risk to who is best able or better able to bear those risks. And also embedding, that risk allocation arrangement in an enforceable contract, So you look at the Lekki, what's it called now? Express road concession, for example, because of the challenges you have in terms of how it is positioned politically, it can actually compromise the interest of the private sector investor in that infrastructure. And that's what we saw, with regards to that particular road or artery. So one, you need to be able to resolve all the political nuances around that particular asset, right? Issues around tolling. So what is the political or the social view or nuance around paying toll to a private sector for the provision of that infrastructure? Are there alternative roads? So all of this needs to be managed before you engage in that particular asset. And that's why the state government had to compensate the private sector investor in that asset. So we need to be able to, as a government or even subnationals, as state governments, be able to provide the risk mitigating framework. Like I said, private capital is not sentimental. It goes where it is protected and where it is returned adequately. So we need to embed that in our PPP framework and the contracts that those frameworks are sitting on.
Thank you, sir. I have quite a few. I have another maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. I know that there are more questions coming. So is there any provision for disengagement? This is from Priye Zobai. For disengagement from a PPP concessional arrangement if it's discovered that the economic expectation from that project does not match reality? Or is there any form of compensation arrangement? I think you've spoken to that, at least with regard to the LCC, by the government to guarantee continuity. I think you've spoken to that question, except if you wanted to add anything else.
No, I think I've wrapped it up.
All right, thank you. I have a question here from Dozie Eze asking what PPP projects are currently ongoing in the health sector, if any? Health sector. PPP projects in the health sector.
Sorry, the screen froze for a while.
Shall I repeat myself?
Please, please.
What PPP projects are currently ongoing in the health sector?
Okay, I think that the PPP projects that are ongoing in the health sector are fragmented, and they are not coordinated for scale. Let me put it that way. They are not coordinated for scale. So you go to a facility like Luz, you might see some PPP collaboration with that specific, hospital, whether in the area of diagnostics or some other areas where PPP is provided or provides facility to support the general, clinical, activities of the hospital. We think that is suboptimal, and currently we are we're in conjunction with the Ministry of Health designing a health sector, a holistic health sector reform program. I'm sure you would have read in the news about 6 weeks ago. The president constituted a health sector reform committee to just look at the entire health sector and our healthcare delivery system. So apart from the institutional reform that will happen, we also see back in terms of modernization. Most of our tertiary hospitals are quite dated, and the equipment, the infrastructure, really are not able to provide, cutting edge healthcare delivery systems. But how do you incentivize? Same problem. Private capital in that sector, if their framework for compensation is not properly defined. So what you then see is that you're seeing more initiatives in the tertiary healthcare segment, and the affordability then becomes an issue. Like we say, real health is not what anybody wishes for himself, and what it costs to treat cancer of a woman is something that it costs to cancer of a rich man. So if the poor man has cancer or any other serious illness, is then consigned to his fate because he can't afford it. And we think that that's one of the primary responsibility of government, be able to ensure the good health of the citizens. So the committee will be inaugurated sometime next week, and the president has given us 6 months to be able to come up with this new healthcare policy and for the country, which will ensure access and quality for everyone.
Excellent, sir. I have an invitation here. It says, Mr. Oko, I strongly recommend that you should consider other development partners in addition to the World Bank on your PPP drive. For example, I know the BP has worked with the UK government before, and we are happy to resume those conversations again. And that's from Ifeinwa Esiekwe. I apologize if I haven't said your name properly. So
okay,
she's saying, yes, she says the UK government is ready.
Thank you very much. Maybe while trying to rush through my presentation, I mentioned World Bank, but we're actually working with NIFE, NIFE also on the framework, and they've also provided some support for us. But beyond the two agencies that I mentioned, we are quite happy to lean on the support of other agencies.
Okay. So I have this question asked a couple of times. So I'm just going to ask it once. And it says, I would like to understand the distinct major roles of BP and ICRC in the PP sector in Nigeria. They seem to have overlapping roles at times. That's from Mr. Olumide Alawode and on Mario as well. So those questions have come asking, there seems to be an overlap.
Brilliant. And that's what the policy pronouncement to the circular of the Secretary to the federal government I mentioned earlier on, sort of clarified. So BP is the implementation agency of government on PPPs, while ICRC is a regulator on concessions and PPPs. And you have to be able to differentiate between a transaction implementation agency and a regulator. You can't do both operations and regulation at the same time. So just like we have in the power sector, BP does the transactions, NERC, Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, does the regulation. So ICRC will do regulation, concessions, and PPP, while BPE will do transaction implementation in conjunction with them.
Okay. I will end with one question, but I think the answer is yes. It says, does the BPP coordination of the PPP also apply to the opportunities in the states across the nation?
Unfortunately, no. So BP is a federal agency, a jurisdiction, federal assets, and federal infrastructure. But we're beginning to see some collaboration with the nationals. We're collaborating with Enugu State government currently. We're collaborating with Cross River State government, and we have an opportunity also with Ekiti to sort of develop and design, a PPP framework for them, and also their own state-owned agency, a version of the BPE in the states that can then drive, that policy at the state level. For us, I think that collaboration is very important, and we can then scale, what we're doing at the federal level, with the states also to get the maximum benefit.
Those are my questions. We really did tax you. I think it will be lovely to have you back, I'm sure. But I don't know how we're going to be able to squeeze that. Hopefully in the next year, we'll bring you back to our investment series when you're talking about the 2022 work plan, perhaps. But thank you very much, sir. I'm going to hand us all over to Engineer Steve Smith, who's one of our vice presidents at the council, at the chamber. And I really want to say thank you very much, sir, for your time. It's been an insightful afternoon. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, my video is not coming on, but I'll press on. On behalf of the Chamber, I would like to pass on our thanks and also to give a couple of announcements for future events. Firstly, thank you to our keynote speaker, Mr. Alex Oko of the Bureau of Public Procurement, for sharing his insight. I think it's clear there are many PPP opportunities arising in Nigeria. For today's arrangements, I'd also like to give a thank you to our moderator, Mrs. Lara Coyote, to the patrons and council members of the Chamber, our sponsor today, ProShare, and the brief, interesting presentation made by Mr. Shitabe. Our thanks also to you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today, to the Trade and Investment Committee and MBCC headquarters for this webinar. Thank you. So a couple of notices. Next Thursday, November the 11th at 11 o'clock, we have a webinar organised by our construction and real estate group, the Chamber, on efficient tax management and for real estate development. And the highlight for event for this year, our presidential inauguration dinner, which is being held on Friday, the 3rd of December. And it would be lovely to see many of you there. Details are on the website and being shown, I think, on the screen now. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Chamber, please also visit our website. You can get the details from there. And finally, please follow us on social media, which will keep you informed on all our activities. So, once again, thank you, everybody.